stars outside the ship's viewing portal twinkled like distant diamonds in the endless void, but inside the cockpit, all was far from peaceful. A cold tension hung in the air, thick and palpable, between the alien girl and the human sitting beside her. She was a being of unimaginable beauty, with shimmering purple skin that seemed to shift colors depending on how the light hit it, and large, expressive eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. She had traveled across galaxies, seen civilizations rise and fall, and fought battles that would make any human quiver. But none of that mattered right now. Her eyes were fixed on the human, her lips pressed into a tight line as her fists clenched in frustration. The hum of the ship's engines did little to mask the brewing storm of emotion that now threatened to spill over. She had been calm at first, interested even, intrigued by the strange and unexpected bond she had formed with this human. Their worlds, so vastly different, had created a connection neither of them could quite explain. But now, in the quiet of the ship's cockpit, that bond was shattered. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, her voice low and dangerous. The human, who had been nervously shifting in his seat, looked at her with confusion. I don't understand." "What's the problem?" he stammered, his face pale. She stood up abruptly, her movements quick and precise as she paced back and forth. "What's the problem? You really don't know? You gave me the wrong one, didn't you?" The human blinked, trying to process what she was saying. His mind was racing, but nothing about this moment made any sense. "The wrong one? I didn't think there was anything wrong with it. You said it was fine, and we—" No, she interrupted sharply, her voice rising. "The wrong condom. Do you even know what I'm talking about?" She turned to him, her eyes narrowed with fury. At first, the human was speechless. He hadn't expected her to get so angry. He had thought he was being careful, respectful even, trying to follow her customs, the many things she had explained to him during their brief time together. But now, seeing the intensity of her reaction, the heat rising in her cheeks, he began to panic. He had made a mistake that felt much larger than anything he could have imagined. I'm sorry. I thought he started, but she cut him off again. "You thought. UTHO, UGHT. The girl's voice was sharp, a dangerous edge to it. Her glowing eyes flickered with a storm of emotions. Anger, embarrassment, disappointment, and above all, a deep sense of betrayal. They had crossed a line together, and this misstep now hung heavily between them. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a rupture in their relationship, one that neither of them had anticipated. The human tried to explain himself, his words stumbling over one another, but it was clear that whatever he said wouldn't ease the tension. There was no way to fix this. Not easily. And certainly not without consequences. He couldn't undo what had already been done. "I swear, I didn't know. I just thought I was being careful," he mumbled, trying to explain. But the alien girl wasn't listening. She crossed her arms in front of her chest, her face a mask of fury. The ship's cockpit felt smaller now, suffocating almost, as if the walls were closing in on them. "You thought," she repeated, stepping closer. Her voice was quieter now, but the venom was still there. "This is an intergalactic mistake, human. You don't just casually pick any protection when dealing with me." She raised her hand to emphasize the point, as if the very idea was absurd. The human took a step back, suddenly feeling like a child being scolded by an alien. "I didn't know it was that important," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I didn't think it would make a difference. We were just—" Making sure, right? The alien girl let out an exasperated sigh, shaking her head. Her long, slender tail flicked behind her in agitation. She had spent years in different star systems, traveling across worlds, navigating countless cultures. But this was different. This was the first time she'd ever had to face such a situation with someone who didn't understand the weight of it. What had started as an exciting, strange, and somewhat thrilling adventure had now turned into something much more complicated. Her gaze softened slightly, but the anger still simmered beneath the surface. It's not about the act itself. It's about respect, human. You can't just pick and choose, not when dealing with someone from my world. The wrong choice could cause catastrophic consequences. The human frowned. Catastrophic consequences. I didn't think. No. She cut him off again, her voice more controlled now but still filled with frustration. You didn't think. You never think. It was quiet for a moment as the reality of the situation began to sink in. They were stuck in a spaceship alone, light years away from anyone who could help. The girl's mind raced as she thought of what could happen next. What had he done? The alien cultures weren't just different, they were alien in every sense of the word. What could be a simple mistake for one person could be catastrophic to another. And now, she was faced with the consequences of that misunderstanding. The human, feeling the weight of the situation and realizing just how serious this was, sat back in his seat, defeated. He could feel the tension between them, the distance that had grown so suddenly. The bond that they had shared, no matter how unexpected, seemed fragile now. His heart sank. The reality of the moment was more profound than he had anticipated. I didn't know, he said quietly, hoping his apology would reach her, but the words seemed small and inadequate. The alien girl took a deep breath, her glowing eyes still narrowed, but the fury in them beginning to ebb, replaced by something more resigned. Of course you didn't know. You humans rarely do, she muttered, shaking her head again. You think everything is simple. You think one size fits all. The human wasn't sure what to say to that. He was out of his depth here, way out of it, and the last thing he wanted to do was make things worse. He could feel the weight of her disappointment bearing down on him, and there was nothing he could do to change what had already been set in motion. But just as he was about to apologize again, the alien girl let out a sigh, her posture softening. I don't have time to explain everything right now. We're in danger, and your mistake could put us both in a position we can't get out of. So, we need to fix this. Now. The human sat up straighter, suddenly realizing how serious this situation was. There was more to this than just a mistake, and the girl's words told him that. The next few moments would shape the rest of their journey. Would they make it through this unexpected challenge? Would they learn to navigate their differences, or would this be the beginning of the end for them? The stakes were higher than either of them had ever imagined. The misunderstanding was far from over, and now the question remained, how would they recover from this moment and continue their journey, knowing that something so small could have such devastating consequences? The girl's eyes locked with his, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. We'll fix this, she said, her voice a little softer now, but there was still a firmness to it. But only if you prove you understand just how much is at stake. The human nodded, but inside, his heart raced. What was coming next? What would this alien girl, so powerful and fierce, expect of him in order to make things right? The tension was unbearable, and the answer could change everything. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. The hum of the spaceship's engines seemed to pulse louder, echoing in the tense space between the two of them. The alien girl stood with her arms crossed, still angry, but now processing what had just happened. Her shimmering purple skin seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the cockpit, giving her an almost ethereal quality, but the expression on her face was anything but serene. It was the kind of look someone gets when they've had enough of a situation, but they know it's not over yet. The human, on the other hand, felt like he was drowning in the weight of his mistake. He had no idea how serious it could be to mess up something so seemingly small. He had thought he was being considerate by asking for something that would be compatible, but now he saw the depth of his misunderstanding. What he thought was just a precaution was, to her, a monumental error, one that could lead to consequences neither of them were prepared to face. "Look," the human began, his voice tentative. "I get it. I messed up. I didn't know your people had such specific requirements. I didn't realize it could be so important, but I'm trying here. I really am. I didn't mean to cause trouble." The alien girl's glowing eyes flickered briefly, her anger still simmering, but she did not immediately respond. She glanced toward the control panel of the ship, her gaze lingering on the blinking lights and the digital readouts that filled the cockpit. She knew the stakes she had been through much worse than a simple misunderstanding with a human. But this was different. The confusion, the layers of distrust, and the consequences of her own emotions on top of everything else were overwhelming. What started as an unusual but somewhat thrilling experience with an unexpected human companion was quickly unraveling into something she couldn't ignore. Her gaze shifted back to him, her expression now guarded, as if she were trying to assess whether he was truly worth the effort it would take to explain the full scope of what he had done. Her species had always been meticulous. Every gesture, every action, every choice held weight. This wasn't just about culture or protocol. This was about survival, about understanding the delicate balance of power between races. "You think this is just about the wrong choice of protection?" she asked, her voice softer but edged with a quiet intensity. The human didn't answer right away, unsure of what she meant. He nodded slightly, wanting to understand but not entirely grasping the depth of the problem. She sighed and turned away from him, walking toward the back of the cockpit. Her tail flicked behind her in agitation, and she stopped by a small window that looked out into the endless blackness of space. She placed her hand on the cool glass, staring into the void. "You have no idea, do you? The implications of your mistake. I know you mean well, but you're too human. Your species hasn't dealt with the kind of dangers we face, and you've just put us in a position where everything could be jeopardized." The human shifted in his seat, trying to find the right words to calm the situation. He wasn't sure why he had thought things would be easy between them. He had expected some awkwardness at first, sure, a little cultural friction here and there, but nothing like this. The enormity of the moment was sinking in. He had misunderstood her needs, her species' expectations, and now they were stuck. He had only wanted to be cautious, but his efforts seemed to have backfired. "Please," he said, his voice urgent now. "I didn't know. I wasn't trying to offend you or put us in danger. I just didn't want anything to happen that we weren't prepared for. I thought I was being responsible." Her back still turned to him. She chuckled softly, though the sound was tinged with bitterness. "Responsible? You don't know the first thing about responsibility, human. When you're dealing with a species like mine, responsibility is far more than just being careful. It's about understanding the balance of things. The choices we make echo far beyond what you can see." The words were like a slap to his face, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt creeping up on him. He could tell that she was holding something back. There was more to her anger than just the mistake itself. He swallowed hard. "What do you mean? What's the real danger here?" The alien girl sighed again, turning away from the window to face him, her glowing eyes focused and intense. She walked back toward the cockpit controls, her footsteps purposeful. "You've made a grave error, but that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that I can't undo what's been done. Not without consequences." The human felt a chill settle over him. "Consequences? What kind of consequences?" She stepped toward him, her expression serious now, and for the first time, the human noticed the weight of her presence. The quiet power she exuded, the knowledge in her eyes that hinted at far more than what she had let on. She was different far beyond what he could ever fully comprehend. "If your mistake is discovered, if they know what you've done, we will both be marked. Do you understand?" she said, her voice dropping lower, barely above a whisper. He didn't quite understand, but he could feel the sudden shift in the air. The stakes were higher now, far higher than he'd anticipated when he first agreed to this strange journey with the alien girl. There was so much he didn't know about her species, about her world, and the more he learned, the more he realized that his misunderstanding had brought them into uncharted territory. She continued, her tone now laced with urgency. "There are those who will never forgive this. They'll view your choice as an act of war, an insult to my kind. And believe me, humans have no idea how dangerous it is to upset the balance between species." The human felt a tight knot form in his stomach. His mind raced, but he had no idea what to say. The weight of her words lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. He didn't know what had been triggered, but he could sense that they had crossed a line. The girl stepped back from him, her posture stiffening. "I've dealt with far worse than this, but I never thought I'd be explaining the fundamentals of intergalactic respect to a human. You don't understand the power dynamics at play. The universe is not what you think. There are rules, unspoken but rigidly enforced. And by making this mistake, you've set us on a path that might not have an easy way back." She turned away from him, her hand running over the console of the ship, her gaze focused elsewhere. He could see her mind working, calculating, trying to figure out the next move. Her emotions had shifted again, from frustration to something far colder. "We need to fix this, and quickly," she added, the words like a command. "I've made mistakes before, but I always find a way to correct them. But we are running out of time. And this mistake, it may be too late to undo." The human sat still, processing what she had said.
His heart was pounding in his chest.
They weren't just stuck in a situation, they were caught in something much bigger. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, but before he could respond, the ship's alarm began blaring, a shrill, mechanical cry. The girl's eyes narrowed as she whipped around to the control panel. "What's happening?" the human asked, fear rising in his voice. "Trouble," she said, her voice grim. "We're not alone anymore." The realization hit him like a punch. Whatever consequences the alien girl had been warning him about, they were already here. The stakes had just been raised. The blaring alarm in the cockpit reverberated through the small, cramped space like a drumbeat of impending doom. The human's pulse quickened as the alien girl's fingers danced over the controls, her expression cold and focused. Her tail flicked back and forth, betraying the anxiety that even she seemed to be trying to suppress. The glow in her eyes intensified, a dangerous light flickering within them as she accessed the ship's systems. "Who's out there?" the human asked, his voice tight, almost breathless. He could feel the temperature in the room shift as the alien girl worked frantically, her movements precise and swift, but the atmosphere had become suffocating. "I don't know yet," she muttered, her voice low, sharp with frustration. "But whoever they are, they've tracked us. This isn't a random alert." He watched her work, realizing that whatever was about to happen, they had no control over it now. The very thing she had warned him about the mistake he made was no longer a distant threat. It was real, and it was coming for them. The human swallowed hard, his mind racing as he tried to grasp the full weight of the situation. "What do we do now?" he asked, though part of him felt like the answer was already clear. He had been warned, but he had underestimated how much of an impact his mistake would have. They were no longer just two people on a strange journey. They were now caught in a battle between powers far beyond his comprehension. Her fingers froze for a moment as her eyes scanned the incoming data. "We hide," she said with a calm that betrayed the rising tension in her voice. "We can't outrun them with the ship's current fuel reserves. We'll have to find a place to lay low until we figure out who's following us." The human's stomach sank. Hide? They had no idea who or what was out there, and now their only option was to run and pray that they could avoid detection. His hands tightened into fists, frustration rising in his chest. He had thought he could fix this, that he could help make things right. But now, the consequences of his misunderstanding were unfolding in real time. "Do you know where we can go?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I know a few places, but nothing is certain. Whoever they are, they're not here by accident." Her eyes never left the display in front of her as she continued to work. "The mistake you made, the choice you didn't understand, it's a mark on us now. And it won't be erased easily." His head spun with the implications. The urgency in her voice had only grown stronger, and he could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the gnawing dread that they were running out of time. He thought of the alien girl, her beauty, her power, her knowledge she was unlike anyone he had ever met. And yet, he had been the one to put them both in danger. He had been careless, assuming that things would work out on their own, that a simple oversight wouldn't lead to something catastrophic. But the truth was that he had no idea what was truly at stake, not just between them, but on a galactic scale. His mistake had unleashed something far greater ahead. "We have to find a way to fix this," the human muttered to himself, more out of desperation than conviction. The alien girl turned toward him, her gaze piercing. "Fix it?" she asked, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and something else, something colder. "You think you can fix this? You think any of this can be undone now?" The human wanted to respond, to say something that would make sense of the mess he had created, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say to her? He wasn't from her world. He didn't understand the intricacies of her people's customs, the delicate balance of intergalactic relationships that was so easily disrupted. He had underestimated how important their choices were, how they could ripple out into something much bigger than either of them could control. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he said quietly, his voice trembling slightly. "I know you didn't," she replied, her voice softer now, though the edge was still there. "But that doesn't change the fact that it did. And now we have to live with it. All we can do is survive long enough to make things right. If we even can." The gravity of her words settled over him, crushing him with the reality of their situation. He had never considered the consequences of his actions on this scale. The vastness of space, the complexities of alien cultures, the fragile threads that held their worlds together. It was all too much for him to fully grasp. But the girl had been clear. They were on a precipice, and the only way forward was to keep moving, to find a way to hide, to survive. As she continued to work, inputting coordinates and adjusting the ship's systems, the human felt a deep sense of helplessness. He had no control over their fate now. Whatever was coming, whoever was after them, would decide their future. The alien girl, though fiercely capable and composed, wasn't immune to the dangers they now faced. She had been strong, confident, but the vulnerability he saw in her eyes when she glanced toward him spoke volumes. Finally, after what felt like hours, she turned to face him. Her face was hard, determined, but there was something else there, a trace of doubt. She didn't let it show for long, but it was enough for him to catch it. "We're not alone," she said quietly, as if the words themselves carried a weight far heavier than he could imagine. The human's breath caught in his throat. "You mean?" "Whoever's out there is getting closer," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes flashing with fear. "And I don't think they're interested in talking." The human's heart pounded in his chest, and the realization hit him like a jolt of electricity. There was no more running, no more hiding. The choice was no longer his to make. They were now at the mercy of whatever or whoever was tracking them, and there was no telling what would happen next. She moved quickly, her hands flashing over the controls with precision. But there was a sharpness to her movements, a sense of urgency that made his blood run cold. He had never seen her this frantic, this on edge. For all her power, her intellect, and her calm demeanor, this was the first time he saw her as someone vulnerable, someone who could be defeated. The countdown on the ship's display ticked down, and every second felt like a heartbeat in his chest. His mind raced with questions. Would they survive this? Could they escape? What would happen if they didn't? But just as quickly as the tension mounted, the alarms on the ship went silent. For a moment, everything was still, and the human dared to hope, just for a second, that they had outrun their pursuers. Then, the ship jolted forward, throwing them both into their seats as a violent shake reverberated through the hull. The alien girl's eyes widened. "Brace yourself," she shouted. "They're on us." The ship bucked again, this time sending the human flying from his seat. He tried to grab hold of anything to steady himself, but the force of the impact sent him tumbling across the floor. Then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The silence was deafening. The sudden stillness was almost worse than the chaos. The ship hung in the silence, suspended in the void of space, and for a brief, horrifying moment, the human wondered if they had been completely destroyed. But as he pushed himself back to his feet, gripping the console for balance, the blinking lights on the ship's control panel told a different story. The ship was still intact, barely, but something else was happening. Something even more unsettling. The alien girl, who had been firmly in control just moments before, was staring at the controls with wide, unblinking eyes. Her posture was rigid, her tail stiff behind her. She muttered something under her breath, a string of words in a language he didn't understand, but the urgency in her tone was unmistakable. "What's happening?" the human asked, his voice shaky as he approached her. He could see her hands hovering over the console, her fingers twitching but not making any moves to act. It was as though she was frozen, trapped in a moment of disbelief. "They've hacked into our systems," she finally said, her voice low and full of an emotion he had never heard from her before: fear. "We've been compromised." They knew exactly what to do. The human's heart skipped a beat. "Who are they? What do they want?" She shook her head, her eyes not leaving the display. I don't know, but they're smarter than I gave them credit for. We're not dealing with just any ship or random pursuers. Whoever they are, they've been tracking us for longer than I realized. They know exactly how to keep us from escaping. The human's mind was racing. The feeling of helplessness he had experienced earlier was now intensifying. But this time, it wasn't just the looming threat that terrified him. It was the way the alien girl was reacting. This was someone who had been through countless battles, someone who had survived across vast stretches of space. Yet now she was caught in the same trap as he was. It was almost as though they had no chance to break free. Suddenly, the ship jerked violently again, and the lights flickered. The control panel displayed a flashing warning. Internal systems breached. A loud, metallic groan echoed through the hull of the ship. The human stumbled forward, gripping the edge of the console for support as the alien girl cursed under her breath. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice tight, her hands flying over the controls once more. But even as she tried to maneuver, it was clear that their ship was no longer responding to her commands. "Can't we just outrun them?" he asked, desperately grasping at anything that might give them a chance. She turned to face him, her eyes filled with frustration. "It's not about outrunning them anymore. They've locked onto our trajectory. They know exactly where we're headed, and they're prepared for anything. Our only hope now is to find a way to disrupt their systems before they get any closer." The stakes were higher than ever, but the human had no idea how to help. He wasn't trained for anything like this. He was out of his element, caught in a cosmic struggle between beings far beyond his comprehension. But the alien girl, she had to know something. He wasn't sure what he could do, but if there was a chance to survive, he had to find it. "What can I do to help?" he asked, his voice urgent. She didn't respond immediately, her eyes focused on the ship's malfunctioning systems. But then, with a barely perceptible sigh, she turned to him. "You can't. Not yet. But if you want to help, stay out of the way. I need to access their network. That's our only chance." The human nodded, retreating back to the seat he had just vacated, watching her work. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, but now wasn't the time to ask. The ship lurched again, harder this time, and the lights blinked out for a split second, plunging them into darkness. When they flickered back on, the alien girl's face was pale, the tension in her muscles palpable. They've locked us in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The airlocks are sealed. We can't get out unless they let us." The human's heart pounded in his chest as he looked out of the window at the empty vastness of space. There was nothing but blackness, but the sense of being watched, of being hunted, was suffocating. It wasn't just that they were in danger, it was that they were trapped, with no apparent way of escaping. Then, as if to punctuate their grim situation, a voice crackled through the comm system. It was distorted, cold, with an eerie metallic undertone that sent a shiver down the human spine. The alien girl froze, her fingers hovering just above the console. "You are not where you belong," the voice said in a language the human didn't recognize, but there was something unmistakably threatening about it. The alien girl stiffened, her expression hardening. "What is that?" the human asked, his voice a mix of fear and curiosity. "Them," she said, her voice tight with anger. "The ones who have been chasing us. They're not just some random fleet. There's something far worse. Their words. They carry more weight than you understand." The human didn't know what she meant by that, but the chilling tone of the voice sent a wave of dread through him. They were dealing with an entity, one with the power to track, capture, and control. It was no longer just about the wrong decision he had made. It was about something bigger, something far more dangerous. The voice came again, its distorted growl breaking through the airwaves. You cannot hide, and you cannot run. You belong to us, now. The ship trembled once more, this time with an ominous force, as if something massive had just emerged from the depths of space to lay claim to them. The human's heart raced as he realized the full extent of what they were facing. This wasn't a simple chase anymore. The ship was no longer just a target. They had become part of something far darker. Who are they? The human asked, his voice barely a whisper, fear taking hold of him. The alien girl's gaze remained fixed on the control panel, but her jaw clenched in frustration. I told you before, there's no escaping this. They've tracked us too long. Now, they've marked us. We've made an enemy that doesn't forgive. Suddenly, the ship shuddered violently as a blinding light enveloped them. It felt like the universe itself was pressing down on them, threatening to crush everything they had fought for. The human braced himself, his mind racing with thoughts of escape, of survival, but it was already too late. Something had just shifted. They were no longer in control, and whatever was coming next was beyond their ability to stop. In that moment, as the blinding light consumed the ship, the human knew one thing for certain: their lives were about to change in ways neither of them could have imagined. The blinding light engulfed them, washing over the ship's fragile hull like a tidal wave. The human's heart hammered in his chest as the ship rattled violently. For a brief moment, he felt weightless, as if gravity itself had been pulled away. Everything around him seemed to dissolve into the light. The controls, the alien girl beside him, the stars outside, all fading into a bright blur. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light flickered and disappeared, leaving only the hum of the ship's damaged systems and the cold void of space. The human blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the sudden darkness. His ears were ringing, and for a moment he couldn't make sense of what had just happened. The alien girl, however, was already moving, her eyes wide with shock. She quickly tapped a series of buttons, her hands trembling slightly as the ship's systems came back online with a series of beeps. What just happened? The human asked, his voice shaking, unsure of whether to feel relief or dread. I don't know. The alien girl's voice was tight, her usual calm demeanor gone. She was staring at the readouts, her eyes scanning the screens, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. We've been transported. Transported? The human couldn't believe it. How? She turned to him then, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. It wasn't just a simple jump. This is something more. Whoever did this, they're playing with forces we can't even begin to understand. The human took a step back, his mind racing. His stomach churned as the realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't a random attack anymore. Whatever force they were dealing with had complete control over the situation, and they were no longer in control of their own fate. Where are we? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She checked the coordinates. We're still in deep space, she replied, her voice thick with disbelief. But it's not where we were before. We've been moved somewhere else, somewhere far from our original course. Before he could process that information, a loud, echoing hum resonated through the ship, vibrating the floor beneath them. A new message crackled over the comms, low and chilling. You cannot escape, the voice said, deep and distorted. You belong to us now. The human's breath caught in his throat. The voice from before. It was the same one that had taunted them earlier. But this time, there was something different about it. Something more final. They weren't just being hunted anymore. They were being contained. The alien girl's eyes narrowed, her face hardening as she glanced toward the human. "This is it," she said, her voice low. "They've found us. They've moved us to a place where they can finally do what they've been threatening all along." The human felt a cold knot in his stomach. "What do you mean? What are they going to do?" "They've been hunting us because of you," she said, her eyes locking onto his, a trace of something like sorrow in her gaze. "Your mistake, your misunderstanding has brought us here. And now, they'll make sure we can't escape. Not just for us, but for everyone else who's been watching. They will make an example of us." A deep rumble passed through the ship's hull as if something massive had just stirred nearby. The human's pulse raced. This was no longer about just getting away. It was about survival. There was no longer any room for mistakes. They had to act now, or they wouldn't get out of this alive. Suddenly, the ship's exterior lights flashed on, illuminating a vast black expanse outside. The human's eyes widened as he saw what they had been transported to. It wasn't a simple void of space they had entered. It was something else, something unnatural. Massive structures, dark and jagged, loomed in the distance, stretching like mountains, their twisted forms visible against the empty backdrop of the cosmos. These were not natural formations. They were artificial, deliberately designed, and utterly alien in every sense. "They've brought us here," the alien girl whispered, her voice trembling with awe and fear. "This is their stronghold." A sudden realization hit the human. This wasn't just a group of random enemies after them. This was something far larger. Whoever or whatever had orchestrated this trap wasn't merely a pursuer. They were a power, a force in the galaxy, and their reach was terrifyingly vast. He turned to the alien girl, desperation in his voice. "We need to get out. We can't stay here." She shook her head slowly. "There's no escaping. Not now. We've crossed a line." But then, just as they prepared for the worst, the unexpected happened. The air in the cockpit seemed to shimmer for a moment. The ship's communication system crackled again, and a new voice, clearer, calmer, came through the speakers. "You have a choice," the voice said, no longer distorted but smooth and calculating. "You can leave this place, but only if you accept our offer. Surrender your claim to the artifact and all of its power, and we will allow you to go free." The human's heart skipped a beat. Artifact. What was this about an artifact? He glanced at the alien girl, confusion written across his face. She, too, looked startled, her brow furrowing as she processed the words. "They know about the artifact," she muttered under her breath. "What artifact?" the human asked, his mind racing. "What are they talking about?" The alien girl turned to him, her expression grim. "The artifact. It's why we're being hunted. It's not just a piece of technology, it's something ancient, something powerful. And it's tied to my people, to my entire race. I thought I could keep it hidden, keep it safe. But now they know we have it. They know where it is." The human's mind spun, trying to piece together what she was saying. The artifact. Something that had drawn the attention of these vast, incomprehensible forces. Was this really all about a mistake he had made, something as simple as choosing the wrong item? Or was it something deeper, something larger that he had yet to fully understand? "We know where it is," the voice crackled again. "Make your choice. Surrender it, and your life is yours. Refuse, and you will face the consequences." The alien girl's hands tightened into fists, her eyes filled with a mixture of fury and resolve. "I will never surrender it. Not to them. Not to anyone." The human could see the determination in her eyes, the same fire that had kept them going through all the chaos. He knew she was right. They couldn't back down. They couldn't let whoever these beings were take what belonged to her and to her people. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, the final twist came. The voice, calm and distant, responded one last time. "You're not alone in this decision." The ship's hull shuddered again. And then, with a flash of light, the impossible happened. From the darkness outside, other ships appeared, gliding toward them. These weren't pursuers, they were allies. And they weren't here for a fight. They were here for the same artifact. The human's breath caught in his throat as the alien girl turned toward him. "What?" she whispered. The voice from the comms seemed to vibrate through the very fabric of the ship. "You have a choice," it repeated. "The artifact is yours, but it has never been truly yours alone." The alien girl's gaze remained fixed on the incoming ships, her expression unreadable, though the tension in her body was palpable. The human's own heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear and awe flooding his senses. This wasn't just a matter of choosing the wrong object or a misstep in a small decision. This was something far greater. A force beyond their understanding was closing in, and they weren't the only ones after the artifact now. The ships moving toward them were not just any fleet. They were sleek, silent, and imposing, like shadows taking form, moving with a purpose. Their shapes were unfamiliar, curved and angular in ways that defied the conventions of anything the human had ever seen. The alien girl had been right to keep the artifact hidden, but the cat was out of the bag now, and it was too late to run. These beings weren't offering them an escape. They were asserting their claim. "Who are they?" the human asked, his voice barely a whisper. The alien girl didn't respond right away, her eyes locked on the ships as they closed in, their outlines sharper and more defined against the starry backdrop. She swallowed hard, her voice coming out barely above a murmur. "I don't know, but I know what they want. And I know we can't give it to them." She took a deep breath, her fingers gripping the console so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "We have to make a stand. If we give them the artifact, they will use it to destroy everything, my people, your world. It's not just a powerful piece of technology. It's a weapon, one that could rewrite the laws of the universe. A race of beings who have the ability to destroy entire worlds. They're called the Rixians. They've been hunting the artifact for centuries." The human exchanged a glance with the alien girl. The stakes were higher than they could have imagined. There was no way out of this, not without a serious fight. "We need to act now," the woman's voice continued. "I can get you weapons, ships, anything you need. But you have to trust me. If you don't destroy the artifact before they get their hands on it, everything will be lost." The alien girl's lips tightened into a firm line. She didn't need to hear more. "We destroy it. We have no other choice." A sudden silence fell over the ship, broken only by the low hum of the failing engines. The fleet outside them was drawing closer. Time was running out. The human felt his chest tighten. "How do we destroy it? We don't even understand how it works." The alien girl's gaze never left the window as she reached into her belt, retrieving a small device, a complex, metal tool, looking like something between a key and a detonator. She held it up to him. "This This is the only way, but it's not guaranteed to work. It's risky. It could destroy everything us, the ship, the entire sector of space we're in. The human stared at the device, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. There was no turning back. Whatever they did next would shape the future, not just for them, but for everyone. The alien girl met his gaze, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. If we don't do this, we will lose everything. And if we do well, we may just have a chance. As the ships drew closer, the human's hand moved towards the device. He nodded, once, firmly. Let's do it. The moment he pressed the button, the ship shuddered violently, its system sputtering as the artifact began to pulse with a faint glow. A loud, high-pitched whine echoed through the hull, followed by a deep rumbling that made the very walls feel like they were shaking apart. Through the viewing windows, the human could see the fleet of ships outside, now far too close for comfort. The Rixians were there, closing in with the cold precision of hunters on the prowl. But the alien girl didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto the artifact, now beginning to spin with energy. She held her breath. They had no more time to second-guess themselves. The countdown had begun. The artifact's glow intensified, becoming blinding. The human's heart raced, his hand hovering over the device that could change everything. He knew what they were about to do. The decision had been made, and then, without warning, a powerful force erupted from the artifact, a wave of energy that spread out across space like a ripple on water. It blasted the ships around them, sending them careening off course. The human felt his body jerk as the ship was thrown back almost violently. He held on to the controls with all his might, struggling to keep the ship stable. The alien girl's eyes widened, her mouth open in disbelief. "It worked," she whispered, but her relief was short-lived. As the pulse from the artifact reached its peak, a blinding flash filled the cockpit. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The ship was suspended in time, surrounded by nothingness. It felt as though the universe itself had paused, holding its breath. And then, slowly, the world began to rebuild itself. The pulse had done more than just disable the approaching fleet. It had obliterated it, sending shockwaves through the very fabric of space. The ships, the Rixians, and their pursuit were no more. The human and the alien girl stared at each other, their faces painted with a mix of awe and disbelief. They had done it. They had destroyed the artifact, and in doing so, they had eradicated the threat that had loomed over them all. But as the dust settled, another voice came through the comms, one that was almost soft in comparison to the earlier chaos. "You did it," the woman said, her voice calm and reassuring. "But remember, this war is far from over. There are always more enemies, more forces to reckon with. This artifact may be gone, but the lessons it taught those will echo through the stars." The human looked at the alien girl, who had already turned to face the starry expanse outside. "What now?" he asked. She gave him a small smile, one that seemed to hold both sorrow and hope. "Now we rebuild, and we make sure that no one ever has to face this again." The human nodded, knowing deep down that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. The artifact was gone, but the lessons they'd learned, the bond they'd forged, would stay with them forever. And as the ship drifted off into the unknown reaches of space, they both understood one truth. In the end, it wasn't the artifact that had been their salvation. It was their courage and their willingness to face the unknown together.